All right, what is going on there, fellas? Welcome back to the channel. I got a quick one for you today. I was considering for a while making this video like something that I spent a little bit longer planning out, making it a little bit like higher production value, if you would speak. As high production value as my channel gets. But I figured, honestly, I could crank this one out today on a little bit crunched time, got back from training a little bit late, because a bunch of my regular viewers have been asking for something more or less along the lines of this video, saying that it would help them with their training. And, you know, big views, flagship videos for the channel that bring a bunch of new people in are awesome, and it makes me feel good that they got so many views. But I really do place value on providing like some information that actually tangibly helps you guys get stronger. Because if you haven't noticed, I really like strength training. It is my shit. I think it's the coolest thing in the world. I'm very passionate about it. And it's cool to be able to talk to a bunch of like-minded people that see what I see in it, which is that it's cool and that being strong is badass. And I'm confused why everybody doesn't want to be strong. So I figured this could be something tangibly that could help you guys. My apologies, my handwriting is terrible. It's been that way. I almost had to repeat 2nd and 7th grade because I could not read or write. So bear with me, but we're gonna go over some ways that you can organize your bench press training and your bench press assistance work to help you bring up your bench press. So let's get into it, right? If we are really hell-bent on increasing our bench press, I usually recommend people dedicate 2 to 3 training sessions to it. This could work with a full body split. Use your imagination. We can move things around and include our squats or our deadlifts if we are someone who likes kind of those SBD days, mixing and matching. But most lifters I try to convince into like, hey, unless your time schedule does not very much allow for it, let's try to get you in the gym 4 to 5 sessions per week. So it's maybe upper, lower, or upper, lower, upper. Or a full for the final one, right? Depending on what the athlete needs to work on. So if increasing bench is a big priority, I would usually err on the side of having 2 to 3 upper sessions. And if you're someone who really likes full body splits, but your bench press habitually lags behind, I do recommend that you experiment at least a little bit with breaking up your training into upper and lower, because that can oftentimes give you the time you need to dedicate as much kind of assistance volume to the smaller upper body muscles as is needed to build up the base. That is very important for increasing the bench press, right? Deadlift, you see very skinny guys having these big displays of strength because the deadlift, there's a lot of positioning involved. There's a very big neural component. Bench press of the 3 lifts seems to be the one that's the most dependent on how much muscle we have. It's a very low skill movement. Now we can get into large arches and skinny guys succeeding there, but for the most part, if we're all kind of talking about just a general bench press with a moderate arch, the commonality among big benchers is having a lot of cross-sectional area of their primary movers, even more so than the squat and deadlift, which are a little bit more neural, a little bit more technical, right? If we have good bench technique, we practice lifting heavy, so we're kind of neurally efficient. The bench press a lot of the time is just gonna come down to a contest of who has big pecs, shoulders, and triceps. So from there, I will often, for bench press specifically, break my assistance work into categories based on muscles. Usually you'll hear strength athletes like myself say, hey, thinking in muscles is for bodybuilders. We strength athletes think in movement patterns. And thinking in movement patterns has been profoundly helpful for improving my performance on all kinds of strongman events, overhead with leg drive, overhead with like a strict overhead, a little bit more like bench pressing in this way, but the squat, the deadlift, thinking of movement patterns, not muscles, has made me a lot better strength athlete. But like I said, a lot of being a good bencher is just being jacked, and people will often make the observation of, hey, this is why like kind of shitty amateur bodybuilders often bench more than shitty amateur powerlifters, even though that's one of their 3 primary objectives, because they're just doing more volume, they're doing more isolation work, they're building up more total tonnage across their upper body, and they just end up being more jacked because of it, and the bench seems to respond quite well to that. So for the bench press, I usually like to kind of categorize my assistance work into like 1 of 4 categories. The first category is just going to be antagonistic work. Lots of guys have talked about the benefits of doing a little bit of back training alongside your bench press training. A big back is a little bit easier to keep tight. We can usually, a guy with larger, more developed kind of lats and upper back has a better time controlling his scapular retraction and, more importantly, depression. There's maybe some argument to be made that that kind of antagonistic work has some benefit for shoulder health, but that's kind of category 1 is antagonistic work, so some kind of pulling. And then we really just break up our category categories of assistance work into the 3 primary movers of the bench press, being tricep work, shoulder work, and pec work. And that's kind of one of the ways that I can kind of break that down for my clients is like, well, these exercise slots are trying to just break up based on the primary movers and trying to increase the cross-sectional area of the primary movers. We're really just doing bodybuilding work. We're not necessarily looking for position-specific strength that's going to transfer to the bench press. We're looking to just get those 3 primary movers bigger, and then our specific bench press training will make it so that those bigger muscles are stronger at the specific task of bench press training. And a lot of the year, even my most advanced benchers will break up their bench assistance work into categories of just kind of working on the primary movers. Now, as you get to high performers, more advanced guys benching a lot of weight for their body weight, there is more consideration to like position-specific strength. There's more consideration to like working movement patterns, emphasizing like kind of more specific qualities rather than just this whole, hey, we're gonna get jacked and then we're also gonna be technically good at benching. Put those 2 things together and you're probably gonna be pretty good at it. Eventually it gets maybe a little bit more complicated than that, but that being said, that will carry you a long ass way, a really long way. Once again, apologies for the handwriting. Hopefully this is somewhat legible. If it isn't, I'm gonna read it out for you, so hopefully you can make some use of this video. But we're gonna look at like, the first way we can break things up is the high frequency model for touching these different muscle groups. We're gonna touch them up at a high frequency, so 2 to 3 times per week each. And this is kind of a breakdown that I used early in my training career when I wanted to stimulate each muscle as often as I possibly could because I saw that as an opportunity for growth. And as I got a little bit more advanced, I moved to the second kind of scheme I'm going to show you after this. But to break down the high frequency kind of scheme, right? Like, so let's say we are doing a 4-day training split, 2 uppers, 2 lowers. So we just have 2 sessions dedicated to the upper body. Session number 1 is going to be our primary bench press, the main thing we're trying to get stronger at. Maybe for you that's a touch and go bench, maybe that's a comp bench if you compete, so a bench with a pause. I recommend most people train with a pause a lot of the year anyway. I think it has a very beneficial training effect regardless, but let's just say this is primary bench, comp bench, primary bench, whatever we're trying to get done here. Then the second thing we're going to do is in our antagonistic movement. Sometimes if someone has like kind of junky shoulders that are a little bit slow to get warm, we might even do the antagonistic movement before the bench press. So here I put lat pull down as an example. You could do a chest supported row. Again, these ones that we're really trying to work on that fine motor control that's going to help our back tightness in our bench press. But we could also put things that are like more horse and weight to help our deadlift. So we could do like heavy pull-ups here. We could do heavy dumbbell rows here. We could even do barbell rows here, potentially depending on how your body kind of manages that fatigue, how good your breathing and bracing is, our proximity to our deadlift day. We can do any kind of row here. It could be specifically like a little bit more specific of a row to help your bench press, or it could be something that's more meant to like help the deadlift later in the week. Either or, so we go comp bench, we do our antagonistic movement, and then we go chest, shoulders, triceps. Now the order of chest, shoulders, triceps can be manipulated to work towards your weaknesses. If you're like, man, I got big old juicy pecs, I rocket the weight off my chest, we can maybe end the session with the pec accessory. And like maybe you feel your shoulders are weak or you feel your triceps are weak, we can order those like accordingly. But we do 1 for each. Potentially we could do multiple for each, kind of depending on your ability to handle volume, how many straight sets you like to do. Maybe you're someone who likes to just like, you're like the Bruce Lee quote, you're like, I fear not the man who's practiced 1,000 kicks 1 time, but the man who has practiced 1 kick 1,000 times. You want to do a lot of sets of pec fly. You want to be really good at it and really get your work out of that for this 1 session. Or maybe you're like, to break up the monotony, I know based on my MRV that I need to do XYZ number of sets. It makes it more fun if I break that up into maybe 2 sets of dumbbell, 2 sets of yada, 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 right? But we're generally classifying it into, okay, we're trying to touch up the pecs, shoulders, and triceps 3 times. So just random examples, pec fly, we use some kind of overhead press and a JM press for the triceps. And then again, we come into our second session. It's going to be the same format again, but probably with different exercise selection for those variations, so we can kind of take advantage of some novel adaptation. So maybe we comp bench again, if you're someone who really likes a little bit higher specificity training model, or we can do our primary bench variation. Maybe that's a Larson press. Maybe that's a long pause bench. Maybe that's a bench to low pins. Maybe that's a 2 board. You know, maybe, I don't know, what am I missing? Maybe it's a Spoto press. Maybe it's a close grip. Holy cow, there's a bunch of different variations that if you feel they work your weaknesses or they highlight certain technical elements of your bench that you don't do well, then you might be served not to just go 2 bench days, but 1 bench day, 1 primary variation day to work on something that's really attacking one of your weaknesses. And then again, we follow that same structure. Antagonistic work, CSR just means chest supported row. Cool, that makes sense. Again, we can kind of select whether we want this to be really aiding our deadlift or really a little bit more fine motor control centric to be helping our skill within our bench press. Depends on what you're working on in your training at that period of time. And then chest, I said dumbbell bench. You guys know I love dumbbell bench. Laterals, right? That's shoulders. Probably not going to yield much direct carryover, but we're not necessarily looking for direct carryover. We're trying to build a bigger machine, and then we take that bigger machine into specific training, and you'll have successful training cycle after successful training cycle. If you took a bodybuilder who is like super jacked, right, and they started training their squat, they would have a decent squat to start, but probably not world beating. But you would see them have the most successful repeated training cycles ever because their muscularity represents their strength potential. So it's like we should always be working on our muscularity. We don't necessarily always need to be like, but it doesn't carry over. Last one, dips. Dips with a pause at the top. Really killer exercise for this specific kind of exercise slot for triceps. Big fan of them. So before this gets too repetitive, we have the 3 sessions. Let's say you're doing 3 uppers, 2 lowers, a very common split that I'll give a lot of my athletes, or I'll recommend to people a lot of the time if they really want to place an emphasis on upper body muscularity, if they have some blend of being jacked and also being strong as their goals, or they're really trying to bring up their bench press. Again, nothing too redundant, like I don't want to be too redundant here, but because we're doing this high frequency model, each day kind of follows a similar template. Maybe you could reorder the different assistance work if you want to place a little bit more emphasis on different things on different days. So, okay, I start with my big bad, like hardcore chest bodybuilding movement on this day, and then I do a little bit more kind of fluffy shoulder and tricep. And then I do my big bad tricep. You could definitely organize it that way, and I think that would work quite well. But maybe we go comp bench, and then primary variation. Maybe you want to run a lower specificity training cycle. You want to go comp bench, variation 1, variation 2. Maybe you have a variation that's doing really well. It's really weak. It's really far behind. You could just go, primary bench, variation, repeat that variation again to almost place more emphasis temporarily. This is something that we can play around within this framework to try to attack our weaknesses without worrying that we're changing things too much. As long as we stay within this framework, we're probably going to avoid that trap of changing things too much and screwing ourselves over. So we can do a lot of fun things with these top ones. You could maybe implement a daily undulating scheme of like heavy, medium, light. You could do something like that. You could do one of these as a speed day if you found that was something you responded well to. There's a lot of things you can do with these primary slots that we could talk about. More examples of antagonistic work, maybe like a neutral chin, a dumbbell row. Maybe if these things are supposed to be a little bit more heavy duty and they're really meant to assist our deadlift a little bit, or more really to attacking more robust upper body pulling strength. So we're doing like weighted chins and we're doing these heavy rows. Maybe they wouldn't complement the bench quite as well, but again, we can fit those into these exercise slots. Rear delt flies and face pulls can fit in here really nicely. I still would class those as antagonistic work. And I find that a lot of people, the rear delt flies actually does help with their back tightness on the bench press, and it makes their shoulders feel quite heavy. Just a bunch of examples, right? Like we talked about, pec fly, overhead sculls, dumbbell bench, laterals, tricep rope. Chest press, if you got a nice chest press machine, that fits in here just fine. There's lots of things you could fit in here. High incline dumbbell press for the shoulders, and then like an overhead dumbbell French press. God golly, there are so many tricep exercises. Those boys at Westside came up with a lot of ideas there. So this is the high frequency organization that if that vibes well with how you conceptualize training, or you're maybe someone who's not quite that strong yet, and you really want to get after these things often and you can recover from it, this is something I might recommend. Now, next we're going to get to the other breakdown that I recommend to maybe a broader audience of like maybe stronger guys, maybe guys who've been doing it a little bit more, and it also meshes with the psychology of maybe a few more lifters, because some of us really like come in and be like, this is shoulder day, right? There's something about that exposure to bro splits early in our training careers that's very addictive. So we're going to get to that in a moment. Once again, fingers crossed you can read this. If not, my apologies. In a later video, it's getting a little late. I'm going to try to go quick. In a later video, we can talk about how this might change for like really, really advanced athletes, like some of the 500 benchers that I work with, or guys who are benching mid fours at a light body weight. Really, really advanced guys, like how does that start to get really highly customized to them? And then, we could talk about like, okay, well, there's a lot of nuance to what specifically we're doing with, yeah, I can say comp bench variation 1 or comp bench 1, comp bench 2, but what the hell am I doing with those? What progression schemes are we following? Is it this primary, secondary, tertiary day split, right, where the loading is adjusted, how auto-regulated? Oh my God, there's a lot of shit we could talk about, but we're gonna get into this kind of second category that works for a hell of a lot of people. We're actually gonna start with the 3-day version of this breakdown because it's actually very, very, very similar to what I've written here, very similar to what we are having Max do to chase down that 500 bench press this training cycle, right? And like I said, we can break things down into antagonistic, shoulders, chest, and triceps. So this I call kind of the prime movers split. So we have, okay, well, we bench 3 days a week. That means we can say, okay, well, we have a day for each one of those primary movers. And we're really, instead of doing this really high frequency model, we're really going to hammer those individually into this slightly pseudo bro split scheme. So we can do a really good job cooking the chest here, the triceps here, and the shoulders here. And this just kind of appeals to a lot of guys. They can logbook it. If they're doing the sessions in a consistent manner each week, the pre-fatigue is consistent, and as long as we can progress under that pre-fatigue, it's not really an issue. You say, oh, but my triceps are shot coming into bench session 3. Well, you'll acclimate with time, but as long as we're consistently the same-ish pre-fatigue for session 3, what matters is that we see progressive overload with time under those similar conditions. That means it's working. We don't need to be fresh for every single session. So really hammering the primary movers in this way can work pretty well. And that's where like something like a primary, secondary, tertiary day, we're like, hey, this third one, we're gonna be pretty smoked. We're gonna anticipate that with our main lift being a little bit lighter. And then we try to come into this first one really fresh. Cool, yada, 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 right? But if we follow this prime mover split idea, this first one, session 1, would be kind of the chest emphasis bench day. So we do our benching. That's the most important thing. It's not just get that done and then move on to this stuff. Yes, being jacked is important for benching. Being good at benching is also very important for benching. We do our antagonistic movement because we're still going to touch on those 3 days a week. I find it's a good habit for shoulder health. Yes, there is no clinical data to validate that. Yes, there's a lot of people that push back on specific pushing to pulling ratios. I don't really adhere to any of those. I don't think you need a 2-to-1. I don't think you need a 1-to-1. But I do think if there's a lot of pressing and very minimal pulling or no pulling at all, I do think eventually it does start to constitute an issue. Although I think most of the arbitrary ratios thrown out there are just that, very arbitrary. So we do dumbbell bench press, right? You guys have heard me rattle on and on and on about this. Maybe if we had a really heavy chest press machine that we could load a big stretch on, we could do that. Maybe if we had a McDonald's bar, which is a bench camber bar to get a big stretch, we could do that. But a lot of the time, I just like getting strong on these pause dumbbell bench. We could just work up to a top set with a rep target of, let's say, 15 to start. If I get 15, I go up next week, and then I do 2 down sets because I know roughly how much work I need to do to generate a good hypertrophy response and come back better the next week. Maybe you're wicked strong and you just do top sets on these 3 things and get out of there because you can really disrupt homeostasis with just 1 set of each of these things. Or maybe you're like, okay, well, I can get away with 1 set on the dumbbell bench, but I need multiple sets on the pec deck to really disrupt homeostasis. That's something you can figure out for yourself. I like for a lot of these things a top set, down set with a rep target. So we try to work top set of 15. It's really just an AMRAP. And if it's north of 15, we go up the next week. And then we would kind of peter out. We can't hit 15 anymore. We're really struggling to add. Maybe that rep target moves to 12 for a while, and then 10, and then 8. Probably would stop at 8 for a dumbbell bench, for example. And then maybe we do straight sets for the pec deck, right? Once you can achieve 3 straight sets of 15 with pause pec deck, we can go up in weight. I like straight sets. I like a slightly higher rep target on those. I find when I've pushed those really, really heavy in the past, if I let my technique slip, it was an easy way to kind of mess up my shoulder or my pec a little bit. So we do a little bit of injury risk management there. And we use kind of the RP philosophy. They kind of apply it unilaterally to, oh, we should kind of stick to high rep targets on everything for injury risk management. I just find there's certain things that maybe are a little bit dicier if we let our positioning slip, like a dumbbell pec fly. I don't love chasing like a heavy 8RM on those. I don't think that would do me too much good. So I will implement those kind of strategies of higher rep targets, maybe straight sets for those as a load limiting option. And then we might finish with some push-ups for some more volume. That was something I did a lot early in my training career, is just filling up like, hey, 5 minutes on the clock, max push-ups. Try to get more next time. just filling in more volume. I think early in training careers, guys probably overthink these things into optimization a little bit too much. Doing push-ups probably will help your bench press for quite a while. Maybe we do dips with a chest emphasis. Again, same kind of thing, like maybe it's an EMOM. Maybe we're just trying to get in a lot of work, however that is. Or maybe we touch up the triceps. I do like touching up the triceps at the end of the shoulder and the chest emphasis day. What makes the tricep unique from those other primary movers? I used to chase trying to be like super logically consistent. Sounds bad, but I tried to create symmetry within my training and try to make it sound really pretty and square and nice. And I definitely see some coaches out there that really present these rules that sound nice, and I wish it worked that way. And when I stopped trying to chase things that sound pretty and square, and if this, then this, it guaranteed works this way, don't let your knee go past your toe, period, right? Like that kind of stuff. When I stopped chasing that and really just focus on, okay, well, I'm going to observe what works, and then I'm going to work my way backwards from those observations and try to understand training better for why and what other things might work as well, and then I can compare those things. I noticed the triceps have a higher MRV on average than the shoulders and the chest. I also noticed that generally when people finish up their pressing, their shoulders are pretty shot, their chest is pretty shot, but a lot of the time their triceps could handle a little bit more volume. I know Paris used to speculate that longer arm lifters, their triceps would be shot because of the amount of extra work they're doing. But the shoulders and chest are also doing more extra work for long armed lifters. I don't think that dichotomy necessarily holds true. And lo and behold, as Paris increased the work capacity of his triceps, he got past his achy elbows by using kind of this continuum of tricep exercises that are more and more taxing on the elbows. Lo and behold, once he trained a little bit more, now he's able to do direct tricep isolation after all of his pressing, after really gassing out the gassing out the shoulders and the pecs. So people have been yelling at me, it's like, oh, you just do triceps after work because you're stocky. Well, I didn't used to be stocky, I used to be very skinny. On average, I do observe that equally trained people can fit in a little bit of extra tricep volume. They just can take a beating and keep on ticking. Take a licking and keep on ticking. Second one would be the tricep day. Maybe neutral chin, so we can make this like a pseudo arm day, and we end with some curls. If we wanted to maybe say, okay, well, this isn't just the tricep emphasis day, I want to hit my arms a good bit. So maybe we do an antagonistic movement that works, yes, the back, but also a good bit of biceps. So maybe we do a neutral chin here. And then we're looking at our big, bad main kind of tricep compound of the day. Again, maybe top set and back offs. Usually I'll give either a pause dip where we pause at the top. I think that pause at the top does have a training effect, trying to get really strong at those. Again, maybe it's 15s, 12s, 8s, maybe down to 6, 5, maybe even a triple if you really wanted to on these. You could peak it to a single. It can be done safely. It's just part of street lifting. You could. I don't think necessarily peaking out to a single would help your bench press. I think maybe stopping at like 3 to 5. But again, we could have this rotating rep target with these down sets to fill in volume. Or if you're someone who dips does not agree with, I recommend learning a folding press, whether that's just like a close grip Spoto press, whether that's a JM press, whether that's a Swede press. There's a whole continuum of like, down here is a press, down here's a skull crusher. There's a bunch of movements in between that you can learn to go really heavy on that can be your big heavy duty tricep movement for the day. Then maybe we do something where we put a really lengthened position on the long head. So some kind of overhead extension with like a tricep rope or a single dumbbell or a double dumbbell. Like we could do a lot of different things here, but something where we're placing like a big stretch on the tricep. And then maybe we cook the triceps with some kind of tricep press down at the end. Or if need be, we can move those tricep press downs before that big heavy one to warm up the elbows. This is something that if you do have kind of junky elbows, warming up with like a tricep rope or a tricep band press down, yes, it'll pre-fatigue you a little bit, but the ability to put in pain-free volume is more than worth it. So sometimes that downward, least invasive on the elbow tricep motion can go earlier, or we can throw it at the end to cook them up, and then maybe we end with some curls. You could probably throw curls at the end of any of these sessions that we've talked about. Third one, right? This is gonna be the shoulder emphasis session. Maybe we go our primary variation on bench. We do wide grip pull downs. I find wide grip pull downs are a good way to work on kind of that proprioceptive upper back control, drawing the sternum up to meet the bar halfway, like we're trying to do on the bench press. Then we have our big vertical press. What is our big vertical press? I don't fucking care. People ask me all the time. We're not necessarily looking for direct carryover. We're just trying to get a monster 15 rep max, 12 rep max, 10 rep max, 8 rep max, 6 rep max on some kind of vertical press. And then we're gonna have big boulder shoulders, and guys with big boulder shoulders that then go do their specific bench training with good technique tend to see the most wildly successful training cycles I've ever seen. I don't necessarily need it to directly carry over. I also find the athletes that have no strength or not even strength, I don't care how strong you are even. If you don't progress something in the vertical plane, the shoulder, the primary move of the shoulder is the deltoid and the lat. Those are like the biggest muscle groups that are acting on that shoulder girdle. Having one of those be pretty underdeveloped in one of its major functions does tend to lead to your shoulders being a little bit more touch and go with your bench training. If you mess something up, if you overdo it slightly, your shoulders get banged up. I find that being strong in a vertical pressing plane gives you a little bit of wiggle room that is very much worth that little bit of training economy once a week to just do some seated dumbbells, some high incline Smith press, some behind the neck Smith press. I don't like, if you've got a machine you love, I just need a vertical press that you make a little bit of effort to progress with time, so that way we don't just have the bare minimum shoulder strength to do our bench press, we have a small surplus. It gives us that wiggle room to, we botch our bar path, we can fight it back into place. And that's actually something I observed with one of my lifters who built up his bench press to be really, really big, never did any vertical pressing, was very weak in the vertical plane. His bench press would be, if he misgrooved it at all, it would come right back down on him. And increasing his strength in the vertical plane of pressing gave him the ability to misgroove and fight it back into place. And it gave him the ability to grind benches rather than being looking easy or just missing completely. So maybe there's something there. So we do big vertical press, could be standing, could be whatever you want, right? Yeah, hypothetically, maybe a high incline is better than a standing if the goal is bench press, because we don't want to be limited by our core or yada, yada, yada. I don't mind. I just want you making an effort to get stronger in some kind of vertical press, right? Then maybe we do an antagonistic kind of rear shoulder motion. Maybe it's a rear delt fly. Maybe it's a face pull. Then maybe we do some laterals, really cook up the shoulders all around. Again, you could use different kinds of laterals. It doesn't need to be just 3 exercises, 4 exercises. You could kind of hit each of these categories of movement with multiple exercises. That's super valid. And then we end with triceps, just because like I talked about, I think they can handle that bit of volume, and the bigger your triceps are, usually the more successful your future bench training. All right, it is getting late. I am tired. I apologize if this is getting progressively less coherent. It's not meant to be a big flagship video for the channel. Just trying to help the couple of regular viewers who've been asking for this, wanting some help with their bench training. I hope this gives you something you can take away. Like I said, a lot of the time, just a simple staying consistent and not spazzing and changing it. Whatever you pick as a vertical press, stick with it for a while. Build your 15, your 12, your 10, your 8, your 6, and then repeat, and then try to beat that last 15, and just kind of wave with, like, we can periodize without ever really leaving those hypertrophy relevant rep ranges. So we can do that. Now, if we just have 2 days, we're probably going to do a chest and tricep day and then a shoulder and tricep day, again, because the triceps can handle it. So all of these are sessions I've used myself, by the way. These are breakdowns of sessions that I have made regular use of at many points through my training career. This sounds very much like a session I might do. Comp bench, lat pull down, and then we either do a dumbbell bench or like a McDonald bar if we have access, just some kind of extended range press, maybe if we've got a really nice machine that lets us kind of load past where we could go with a bar. Getting wicked strong at that would probably pay dividends. Yeah, we wouldn't be getting the cool stability benefits we get from dumbbells, so maybe it wouldn't, like I talked about. For me, if I'm strong at these really deep dumbbells with a pause, my negative feels so unbelievably stable on my bench. So maybe I wouldn't get those stability benefits, but I would get the power off the chest that I'm looking for from those. And then maybe we do a Smith JM press because it's easy to standardize compared to a regular JM press, or maybe we do an SSB JM press. Or usually, if this was me earlier in my training career, I would do a dumbbell bench. I would do dips with a pause at the top, and then depending on what I needed to work on, I would either do two tricep motions to really cook the triceps a little bit more, or I would really double down if I needed more power off the chest, and I would do maybe a pec fly and just 1 tricep movement. Kind of depended on what I need to work on, but this is a session that I've run through a million times. Is, okay, well, I bench, I do lat pull downs, dumbbell bench, dip, tricep isolations, or pec flies. That is a session I have made use of, and then try to overload within parameters that sound reasonable for each of these exercises. Like, yeah, maybe we're not taking the lat pull down to a 6 repper. Most people, that would look kind of shitty, especially if we're looking for those kind of fine motor control, drawing the chest upward, not caving the chest downward to move the weight, right? There's just considerations to be made there, but I do just think just a simple top set, down set, or straight set with a rep target can go a long ass way, especially because we can rotate exercises within these movement slots. When it gets so sticky, we would need a more advanced kind of periodization or a more advanced progression scheme. We can just rotate them. These are just a means to an end to try to get more jacked, to support more good bench training, or just to look fucking jacked. So the other session would be the shoulders and tricep session. Pretty basic. We do our main variation. We do our chest supported row or some shit. And then, again, we just pick a vertical press. I put behind the neck Smith here. If behind the neck Smith doesn't work for you, awesome. That's totally fine. Anything that works for you. I would say be warned, don't do something where you're reversing at your forehead. Please, you will get better shoulder health returns, better maybe carryover depending on your level. better hypertrophy if we don't do these fucking shitty like top half dumbbell partials where we stop at the top of our head. Rotate those dumbbells, drop the weight back, pull them in there and progress that. And even if it's a little bit of a hit to your ego because you were throwing up the 80s to the top of your head, get some range of motion on your vertical presses, pretty please. Then maybe a rear delt fly, maybe a lateral raise if shoulders are like a real weakness. We just want to really build up that work capacity of all of the muscles kind of surrounding the shoulder girdle. Or maybe we just drop straight into the tricep portion of the workout. We do dumbbell sculls and tricep rope. So I'm exhausted. Let me know if you have any questions. I gave it my best shot. Probably should have prepped more for this one, but I do hope this guy helps you guys with your bench training. That's something that I pride myself on when I get these messages saying like, hey, practically your videos help me go from 185 to 225 or 275 to 315. It's cool because it's a wide range. I've had people say that they got their first 1 plate bench with some of the advice I've offered, and I've had 2 or 3 guys say they got their first 500 bench. So I'm glad I can offer advice that is practically applicable to such a wide variety of people. And I hope to help you guys in your strength endeavors further because I think it's fucking cool. If you made it this far, please leave a like. I appreciate you boys as always.